Not the sterile green of hydrodomes or cultivated arboretums, but the living, sweating, storm-fed green of an agri-world, its soil black with nutrient richness, its lowlands veined with irrigation lines that fed the starving worlds of the Loki sector. It was not famous, it was not holy, it was functional. And in the Imperium, functionality is sacred in its own right. The Crimson Fists did not choose Rynn's world. They were assigned it, a practical choice following the second founding. A quiet world on the edge of troubled space, close enough to Orc migration routes to demand constant vigilance, but far enough from Segmentum Command to be left alone. It suited them. This frontier rock with more tractors than temples, more crop yield quotas than parades. Over time, they became its guardians, not its rulers, not its masters, just its watchmen. The fortress-monastery they built, Arx Tyrannus, was not ostentatious. It was not meant to be seen. Dug into the mountains like a coiled blade, its bunkers and defense grids were shaped by necessity, not ceremony. To the people of Rynn's world, the Fists were a presence more than a power. Their thunderhawks left contrails across dawn skies. Their drop pods turned fallow fields into sacred scars. But they rarely walked among the people. And still, they were loved. Because when the raiders came, the pirates, the mutants, the greenskins, it was always the Fists who stood between the flame and the harvest. Without them, the agri-grids would burn, the soil would go feral, the food would stop, and dozens of worlds would starve. But that reverence, that bond, was forged in something deeper than gratitude. It was forged in the ash, when the Orc War of Snagrod, arch-arsonist of Sharadon, came roaring through the sector. Rynn's world became a target, a prize, a proving ground. The Fists stood ready. They had prepared for this moment. Defensive augers primed, kill zones plotted, orbital defenses armed. And then, it happened. The fortress-monastery, Arx Tyrannus, their home, their heart, was destroyed in a catastrophic accident. One of their own orbital torpedoes, misfired, perhaps sabotaged, struck the mountain like the Emperor's own contempt. In a single blinding moment, most of the chapter was annihilated. Over 900 battle brothers. Gone. The Orcs landed before the dust had settled. What followed wasn't a war. It was a last stand without an end. Outnumbered, outgunned, and shorn of command infrastructure, Pedro Kantor, chapter master and survivor of the blast, led the remains of his brothers in a planetary defense campaign that would become legend. They didn't reclaim the world with overwhelming force. They fought in silence, in sewer tunnels, in collapsed hab zones, in irrigation trenches now filled with blood. Alongside them, the people, farmers with stubbers, children carrying messages through war zones, old men who'd worked the same field for 80 years, now digging foxholes into it. And this is what separates Rynn's world from other chapter homeworlds. It is not sacred, it is not a shrine, it is a wound, and it remembers who bled for it. After the war, it did not ask the Fist to rule. It asked them to remain. Even now, with the new fortress-monastery being rebuilt on the scorched bones of the old, Rynn's world does not kneel before its protectors. It fights with them, feeds them, sends its sons and daughters into their hands and calls it honor. The bond between chapter and world is not ritual. It is earned, daily, with sweat, with fire, with memory. And that bond may be the only thing holding both together. The Crimson Fists do not recruit from comfort. They do not draw from those who seek war. They draw from those who endure it. Though Rynn's world is their bastion, it is not their cradle. The Crimson Fists were a crusading chapter for millennia, fleet-based, border-bound, constantly bleeding across the edge of the Imperium's map. Their recruits were never bound to a single world. Instead, they scouted across the Loki sector, harvesting the strongest, most steadfast survivors from worlds already half swallowed by adversity. Above them all stood one world, Blackwater, a feral world scarred by acid storms, hostile fauna, and soil too toxic to farm without masks or miracles. Its people survive not through savagery, but stoic resilience. They are a noble caste of strugglers, tribes locked in constant warfare against nature, not each other. And in that crucible of isolation and loss, the Crimson Fists found their finest material. Each year, they return, not with glory, but with judgment. The Festival of the Bloodied Fist is not a celebration, it is a culling. Those who present themselves as aspirants are subjected to a series of escalating trials: strength under pain, clarity under fear, honor under temptation. But the final trial is what etches itself into legend: the Barb Dragon. To be considered worthy, an aspirant must enter the toxic swamps alone, track one of the native apex predators, armored beasts of acidic blood and ossified bone, and kill it with bare hands. No tools, no allies, no second chances. If the dragon dies, the boy may live. If the boy dies, the swamp is quiet. Those few who survive are transported to the chapter's subterranean vaults beneath the rebuilding ruins of Arx Tyrannus. But survival alone is not enough. There, the apothecaries begin the rites of transformation. Gene seed compatibility is rare, and many are lost, not to battle, but to metabolic rejection, neural collapse, or complete system failure. These failed aspirants are not discarded, however. They become chapter serfs, armourers, archivists, support crews, each one bearing the burden of nearly becoming more. Those who pass are no longer boys. As neophytes, they serve in the 10th Company, scouts, watchers, silent blades in dark corners of the battlefield. Here, they learn kill zones, sabotage, ambush warfare. They do not fight alongside veterans. They are shadows beside them, observers of death before they earn the right to cause it. Only after passing the steeping, a ritualized series of physical and spiritual trials that test their mastery over the self, their devotion to duty, and their integration of the gene seed, are they allowed to join one of the reserve companies as full battle brothers. Only then do they wear the red gauntlet. It is not given, it is not granted, it is survived. And even now, though the chapter has begun drawing recruits from nearby systems and, more recently, from among the sons of Rynn's world itself, Blackwater remains sacred. It is not home, it is not hearth, it is the proving ground, a place where pain is law and only those who respect it become worthy of the name. Crimson Fist. Before the crimson, there was gold. Before the clenched gauntlet, there was the Hand of Dawn. To understand the Crimson Fists, you must begin in the dying hours of the Horus Heresy, not at Terra, but just before, far from the throne. In the void of fall. It was there, among shattered fleets and collapsing alliances, that Alexis Pollux, captain of the Imperial Fists 405 Company, made a choice that would ripple across millennia. When his fleet was ambushed by the Iron Warriors, traitors of the same genetic bloodline, he didn't fall back. He didn't plead for orders from a distant Primarch already consumed by the siege of Terra. He adapted, he endured, he won. The Battle of Foul was no scripted triumph. It was a brutal, grinding contest of attrition, wits, and physics. A void war fought through flat clouds and hull fractures, where every maneuver cost blood and every decision killed friends. Pollux survived, not because he was the best swordsman or the most fanatical disciple of doctrine, but because he understood what Rogel Dawn taught his sons in silence. Endurance is its own form of war, and war is its own form of loyalty. After the heresy, as the legions shattered into fragments under Guilliman's edict, the Imperial Fists faced extinction, not from defeat, but from division. Dawn resisted the Codex Astartes, resisted the very idea that his legion should be split. But even pride has limits. When the alternative was rebellion, Dawn relented. And it was Alexis Pollux who answered the burden of that compromise. Chosen to lead one of the new chapters, Pollux did not rage at the breaking of the Legion. He did not mourn the loss of identity. He accepted his task with cold clarity. He gathered a portion of his brethren, altered their heraldry, revised their chain of command, and gave them a new name, one that honoured blood lost and duty continued, the Crimson Fists. The name was not poetic. It was a warning, a message to the galaxy and perhaps to the traitors of his own gene line, that these sons of Dawn had not forgotten what it cost to remain loyal. They were forged as a crusading chapter from the start, fleet-based, decentralized, reactive. Where the newly founded Black Templars sought the divine in the Eternal campaign, the Crimson Fists sought purpose in containment, fortification, attrition. They became the shield for systems too small to save themselves and too far for terror to notice. And they did not complain. Their history is filled with wars no one remembers. They fought in the shadows of greater conflicts, held flanks while others took credit, lost brothers for moons without names. But always they returned, not to fanfare, but to readiness. When they were eventually granted stewardship over Rynn's world, it wasn't because they asked for it. It was because they'd earned it. It gave them a place to anchor, a world to protect, and a population to serve, not as tyrants, but as sentinels. And from that mountain bastion, Arx Tyrannus, they stared into the stars, awaiting the next enemy, the next test, the next opportunity to prove that survival wasn't luck. It was legacy, but that legacy would soon be tested beyond anything Pollux could have prepared them for. The Orc War of Snagrod, the burning of the fortress, the erasure of almost everything they were. And yet, still they wear his name. Still they fight in the shadow of his resolve. Still they pass down his lesson, not as commandment, but as example. We are not diminished, we are refined. The Crimson Fists are not ornate. They do not display their culture in the form of elaborate processions or ostentatious banners. Their traditions are forged from pragmatism, sorrow, and the enduring weight of duty unfulfilled. But make no mistake, beneath that reserved exterior is a chapter rich in heritage, deeply faithful to the lessons of the past, and utterly uncompromising in the rites that define it. When Chapter Master Alexis Pollux, former praetor of the Imperial Fists, took the helm of the newly created Crimson Fists, he structured the chapter strictly along the lines of the Codex Astartes. This was no reluctant concession. It was a choice rooted in clarity and survival. But Pollux did not sever ties with his legion's deeper methods. He retained many of the combat doctrines and defensive tactics Dawn had drilled into his sons, and in doing so, he ensured that the Crimson Fists would inherit the discipline of the Codex, reinforced by the fury of Phal. They became masters of fortification and siege resistance, experts in layered fallback tactics and kill zone geometry. Their oral histories, passed from veteran to neophyte, served as field doctrine, constantly adapted through centuries of warfare against countless Xenos breeds. But even structure can hold memory, and the Crimson Fists remember well. Once every 100 years, the Sons of Dawn gather, not to celebrate, but to test. Alongside 11 other chapters of Imperial Fists descent, the Crimson Fists participate in the Feast of Blades, a tournament of martial skill and discipline that honors their shared Primarch. It is not a festival. It is a reckoning of blood and bone, where swordmasters and veterans measure themselves against their cousins, and tradition is carried on not in speeches but in strikes. Each year, on Foundation Day, the chapter gathers before the Sacratium, 20 chaplains who preside over a ritual unlike any other. At the heart of this rite lies a relic, a scepter containing a portion of Rogel Dawn's blood, preserved across 10,000 years. During the ceremony, the dried remains liquefy before their eyes, a phenomenon that defies explanation and has never once failed to occur. It is called the miracle of the blood, and to the Crimson Fists, it is more than proof of their lineage. It is a reminder that Dawn never left them, that his blood still watches, still waits, and still demands something more. For a Scout Marine to become a full battle brother, survival is not enough. The final trial is brutal and symbolic, a test conducted on the death world of Blackwater, long a sacred recruiting ground for the chapter. There, the aspirant must journey alone into toxic swamps and kill a barb dragon with their bare hands. Those who survive return not to applause, but to ritual. The steeping follows. The neophyte submerges their left fist into the blood of their kill, marking their readiness to ascend. From that moment on, their left gauntlet is painted crimson, a visual seal of their transformation, the symbol that gives the chapter its name. Veterans of the First Company, the Crusade Company, may, upon exceptional merit, be allowed to paint both fists crimson, and the most honoured among them are entrusted with ancient power fists, relics of unimaginable power and heritage. The Crimson Fists have bled more against the Orc menace than most chapters combined. Their hatred is not rhetorical, it is personal. Entire campaigns have been fought for the right to continue existing, and their trophy rituals reflect this brutal intimacy. Many battle brothers carry Orc talismans, teeth, banners, even skulls, often carved into detailed reliefs commemorating personal victories or the slaying of a nob or war boss. These are not for show. They are reminders, both to themselves and to the Orcs they face. A visual insult, a dare, a record of supremacy that offends the enemy into reckless charges and gives the fists one more chance to take them apart. Though rare, there have been occasions when a Crimson Fist, on the eve of a major battle, is seized by visions. These visions speak of fire, of fate, of the Emperor's direct will. When this happens, the warrior is permitted to don the armour of faith and wield the black sword, becoming an Emperor's champion, a sacred role more commonly seen among the Black Templars, but not absent from their kin. No instance of this has been recorded since the destruction of Arx Tyrannus in 989 of M41. The sacred vestments may have been lost in the blast, or perhaps the Emperor no longer speaks to the chapter in that way. No one knows. But they still wait. The armour remains unreplaced. The silence has not yet been broken. The Crimson Fists maintain an extensive liturgical calendar, honouring not just the Emperor and Dawn, but Alexis Pollux, their great father. These sacred days are not holidays. They are moments of collective introspection and brutal self-evaluation. Day of Foundation, the most solemn, sacred day in the chapter's year. All available battle brothers return to Rynn's world, where they gather in the remains of Arx Tyrannus to read the words of Dawn and Pollux, recount the deeds of the chapter, and relive their past not as myth, but as obligation. Day of Renewal, a newer tradition born from the Indomitus Crusade, when Robut Guilliman's forces restored their gene seed banks and gave the chapter another chance. On this day, the Fists renew their oaths, not as gratitude, but as debt. The Crimson Fists do not practice tradition for tradition's sake. Every rite, every sacred date, every ritual kill, they are all tools. Tools to remember, tools to resist collapse, tools to remain worthy of the blood that was shed to make them. They are not ornamental, they are structural. Because if memory fades and culture withers, then even survival becomes meaningless. The Crimson Fists are not held together by superstition, zealotry, or myth. They are held together by discipline. After the destruction of their fortress-monastery and the deaths of hundreds of their brothers, it would have been easy, expected even, for the chapter to fracture. But they didn't. Because the Crimson Fists are not trained to stand. They are trained to continue. Their organizational foundation is that of a Codex Astartes-compliant chapter, 10 companies, each with its own command structure, battle role, and support staff. But this is not blind obedience to Guilliman's decree. This is structure as survival strategy. From the earliest days under Alexis Pollux, the Crimson Fists embraced the Codex with a clarity uncommon even among their peers. They saw it not as dogma, but as scaffold, a frame around which a chapter could build its own identity while ensuring cohesion, adaptability, and autonomy. When the heresy tore the legions apart, Pollux didn't just inherit doctrine, he engineered a future with it. And that future was tested when the chapter nearly died. In 989 of M41, when Arx Tyrannus was vaporized and the chapter reduced to barely 100 survivors, their codex structure didn't collapse. It compressed. Officers shifted roles without hesitation. Reserve companies became frontline forces. Commanders acted as squad sergeants. Veterans took on training roles, bridging the gap left by dead chaplains and fallen captains. That adaptive backbone saved them. It also hardened them. Since then, every Crimson Fist knows that rank is not a reward, it's a placeholder. If your superior falls, You do not flinch. You step forward. You absorb their role, their burden, and their name if needed. Each company is autonomous. They train, operate, and deploy with minimal reliance on external command. This is not decentralization, it's distributed endurance. In a chapter constantly flirting with extinction, every brother must be a leader. Every squad must function as a self-contained war machine. The first company, known as the Crusade Company, holds the chapter's veterans. Many have served in the Death Watch, bringing back skills honed in kill team operations across the galaxy. Their experience is not catalogued, it's internalized. Newer brothers learn not through lectures, but through survival beside them. The 10th Company, the Scouts, are more than just neophytes. They are forward reconnaissance specialists, trained in the art of observation, sabotage, and asymmetrical warfare. When the chapter was at its lowest, it was scout squads that kept the lines connected, running vox silent through cities infested with orcs and psyker-born horrors. Between them, the remaining reserve and battle companies rotate fluidly. The fists do not obsess over ceremonial designation. They focus on capacity, who is fit, who is functional, and who is ready. If a squad is too small, it's folded into another. If a company loses its captain, the next senior-most brother takes command without a word. Because they don't have time for hesitation. Emotion has a place in the chapter, but it's channeled. Psychological training is rigorous and continuous. After Rynn's world, the Crimson Fists reinforced not only their walls, but their minds. They learned what trauma does to brothers, what survivors' guilt can do to an entire command structure, what happens when memory corrodes morale. To counter this, they implemented a rotating cycle of reflection and pressure. Battle followed by analysis, followed by controlled rites of remembrance. Veterans are expected to speak of their failures, not hide them. Recruits are exposed to battlefield losses early, not to break them, but to teach that breaking is survivable. This has resulted in a chapter whose members carry unimaginable psychological weight and remain operational. At the head of this structure is Chapter Master Pedro Kantor, a survivor not just of Rynn's world, but of its legacy. Kantor is not a glory seeker. He is a logistician, a strategist, and a leader forged in attrition. He has refused calls to merge the Crimson Fists with other depleted chapters, refused to break their traditions for short-term gain. He commands not through spectacle, but through certainty. Under his watch, the chapter has remained whole, not through expansion, but through focus. The Crimson Fists are not rigid, they are not brittle. They are structural memory given form. They do not just follow the codex, they use it like a knife. Efficient, sharp, never ornamental. In the Imperium, power often screams. It burns banners, it redraws sectors, it drowns systems in orbital fire just to make a point. It wraps itself in prophecy and ego and dares the galaxy to question its divinity. But Pedro Kantor is not that kind of power. He does not scream, he does not posture, and he has never needed to. He is the kind of power that survives. When the orbital torpedo obliterated Arx Tyrannus, when nearly 1,000 of his brothers were vaporized in a single blinding instant, Kantor did not panic. He did not falter. He gathered the few remaining, took command of what was left, and made a simple decision that would echo for generations. We are not finished. That was not a rallying cry, that was a statement of fact. Kantor is a warrior scholar forged in Dawn's tradition, but tempered by Pollux's practicality. He was never designed to be a mythic figure. He was not a visionary. He was an executor, a commander with a flawless memory for logistics, a relentless devotion to efficiency, and an internal world armored against despair. And that's why the Crimson Fists still exist. After the destruction of their fortress and the full-scale Orc invasion, Kantor refused to retreat. Not because of glory, because there was nowhere else to go. And because Rynn's world wasn't just a strategic asset, it was a promise. So he turned rubble into kill zones, turned sewer maps into recon networks, turned PDF survivors and wounded scouts into functioning strike teams. Every street was charted, every crater became a defense point. The Orcs had numbers, Kantor had resolve under pressure, and he used it surgically. Over the next weeks, he led counteroffensives that turned the tide not through brute force, but through targeted attrition. strike, vanish, bleed the enemy dry. Every inch of ground taken was a chapter in a war story no one expected to be written. He did not ask to lead a miracle, but he made one happen anyway. Kantor does not rule through spiritual force. He commands through presence. His voice is rarely raised. His orders are precise, stripped of grandeur, loaded with context. He quotes the Codex Astartes not as scripture, but as toolkit. He walks the barracks. He reads the casualty reports himself. He knows every name. He is not warm. But his brothers follow him because they know he will never lie to them. Where some chapter masters elevate themselves to near priesthood, Kantor wears his armor like a burden. He is often seen repairing his own war gear beside his tech marines, speaking plainly to neophytes, standing vigil in the ruins of Arx Tyrannus long after others have returned to duty. He doesn't ask for devotion, and that is why he has it. Kantor is also a bridge to Guilliman. When the Indomitus crusade reached the battered husk of Rynn's world and replenished the Crimson Fist's gene seed, Kantor accepted it not with celebration, but with measured responsibility. He created the Day of Renewal not as a feast, but as a debt marker, a reminder to every new brother that they live because someone else died, that their survival is not a victory, it is an obligation. And Kantor has no intention of letting them forget it. He is not Dawn, he is not Pollux, he is not Guilliman, he is Pedro Kantor, and that is enough. Because sometimes, in the smoke and blood of a dying world, when the line begins to buckle and the Vox goes dead, all you need is someone who won't leave. And Pedro Kantor has never left. When the Indomitus crusade reached Rynn's world, it did not bring celebration. It brought ghosts with new armor and war gear that hummed with foreign machine spirits. It brought warriors taller, faster, stronger, perfect in ways that no Crimson Fist had ever been. It brought Primaris Marines. And in doing so, it split the chapter in half, not physically, but philosophically. Because these warriors were not born of shared memory. They did not fight at Rynn's world. They had never bled in the swamps of Blackwater, or carved their first kill with bare hands. They came fully formed, forged in the gene labs of Belisarius Call, delivered by edict of Robut Guilliman himself. They were reinforcements. But they were also a reckoning. In the wake of the chapter's near extinction and painfully slow rebuilding, the arrival of new gene stock, advanced armor, and dozens of fresh reinforcements should have been a salvation. And in many ways, it was. The Primaris brought stability, strength, and a resurgence of battlefield effectiveness not seen in generations. But they also brought questions. Who were these warriors who called themselves Crimson Fists, but did not bear its scars? Who walked the halls of Arx Tyrannus without having buried brothers beneath it? Who quoted Dawn's values but had never stood in Kantor's silence? To veterans who had survived the near end of everything, these new arrivals were strangers wearing borrowed colours. Pedro Kantor, ever the pragmatist, accepted them. Not out of blind trust, but out of necessity. He did not kneel before Guilliman, but he did not reject him either. He issued orders for the integration of the Primaris into all companies, pairing them with legacy squads, rotating command, reinforcing structure. And he watched. What he saw over time was not loyalty earned by programming. It was loyalty forged through proximity to shared suffering. Primaris warriors began to bleed in the same dirt. They took the same oaths. They completed the steeping, just as any neophyte would. And slowly, very slowly, they were allowed into the chapter's memory. The gap remains, but it is narrowing. Not every Primaris was created in a vat. Some crossed the Rubicon Primaris, undergoing the high-risk surgery to ascend from firstborn to something more. Among those who survived this agonizing transformation, Pedro Kantor himself is the most significant. He crossed the Rubicon after much resistance, not because of personal ambition, but because the chapter needed a symbol of continuity. A leader who could still walk into the fire while carrying their legacy on newer shoulders. His survival, against staggering odds, was seen by many as an unspoken validation. Others have followed. Among those known or suspected to have crossed, Captain Halgrim, of the Second Company, now leads his forces with enhanced strength and reflexes, but remains unflinchingly grounded in pre-Primaris discipline. Chaplain Estevan was one of the first non-command ranks to undergo the transformation, reportedly to preserve an ancient relic gene seed line nearly lost in the Rynn's World incident. Not all who attempt the Rubicon survive. The Crimson Fists do not treat it as ritual, nor as salvation. It is a calculated risk, taken by those who believe the chapter can bear the cost of failure. The chapter's adoption of Primaris-era war gear has been swift but careful. The MKX Tacticus and Gravis armors are now common among frontline companies, and intercessors, hellblasters, and aggressors operate alongside traditional tactical and devastator squads. Redemptor dreadnoughts, though viewed with some unease due to their massive scale and machine psychology differences, are now a fixture of the chapter's armoured core. Relic wargear, however, remains reserved. Many Crimson Fists believe that some relics still remember the hands that once held them, and that those machine spirits may not yet accept new users. As such, there are restrictions on which Primaris warriors may wield legacy artifacts, and these are reviewed case by Tech Marines and Chapter Command alike. Integration is not complete. It may never be. In quiet moments, some veterans still call the Primaris outsiders. Some Primaris still look at firstborn relics and feel the weight of memory they did not earn. There are no mutinies, no schisms. But there is silence in the chapter's halls where once there was laughter. Reflection where once there was fire. And that silence has meaning. Because the Crimson Fists do not reject the future, but they will never let it forget the past. The Crimson Fists do not kneel. Not before statues, not before gods, not even before memory. But make no mistake, they believe. Their faith in the Emperor of mankind is absolute. It is not the blinding, zealous fire of the ecclesiarchy. It is not the chanting martyrdom of the Black Templars. It is a quieter devotion. Sharpened, worn smooth by time. Faith that has passed through fire, blood, and silence, and still remained. For the Crimson Fists, faith is function. It is purpose translated into survival. They do not cry out to the Emperor for salvation. They do not ask for signs. They know he cannot answer. They act as though he is watching anyway. To the Crimson Fists, the Emperor is not a mystery. He is sacrifice made manifest, the man who gave his life for a dream the galaxy was never worthy of. Their reverence is stripped of mysticism. It is duty-born, focused, and grim. But above all, they venerate Rogel Dawn, their gene father, as the ultimate example of that same sacrifice. Dawn did not ascend. He endured. He built walls as the galaxy collapsed. He broke himself on the hope that something might survive. And the Fists remember that. In their rites, in their sermons, in the miracle of the blood, they carry the memory of Dawn not as myth, but as standard. They do not call him God. They call him our Father. They study his tactics, quote his condemnations, recite his failures just as readily as his victories. Because for the Crimson Fists, to forget the weakness of the strong is heresy. The chapter's chaplains, collectively known during sacred observances as the Sacratium, are not orators. They are not meant to inspire. They are meant to remind. During battle, they walk behind the lines, speaking quiet litanies not of praise, but of names. Names of the fallen. Names of those who should have been there. Names of squads buried with no rights because there was no one left to remember them. Their role is not to blind the warrior with righteousness. It is to anchor him, to remind every brother what they fight for, and more importantly, what they fight against within themselves. A Crimson Fist sense of self is not based on rank or victory. It is based on continuity. Every warrior is a link in a chain that stretches from Pollux to Kantor, from Fall to Rynn's world. That identity is forged in training, reinforced in battle, and sealed in rites like the Steeping, the Day of Foundation, and the Day of Renewal. To wear the Crimson Gauntlet is to bear collective memory, not personal achievement. This is why the arrival of the Primaris created tension, because they carried the gene seed, the protocols, the firepower, but not the memories. And for a chapter whose entire faith is built on earned identity, that was more than a cultural gap. It was a wound. It still is, but time and blood heal. And the Primaris who now train, bleed, and die beside firstborn brothers are no longer outsiders. They are becoming part of the story. And the chapter, ever aware of the slow erosion of truth, has begun recording their names beside the fallen. Not to elevate them, but to mark them as ours. The Crimson Fists are utterly intolerant of corruption. As a chapter often stationed on the frontier, where minor chaos cults, Xenos worship, and psychic anomalies arise with alarming frequency, their records show a near-obsessive vigilance against deviation. They employ librarians, yes, but their use is limited, heavily supervised, and their role is far more observational than mystical. There are no sanctioned divinations, no sanctioned ecstasies, only sanctioned control. They do not fear chaos, they fear what it turns good men into, and they have no patience for theories. The closest thing to a unified mantra is the chapter's battle cry. There is only the Emperor. He is our shield and our protector. It is not shouted in every battle, it is not carved into every weapon, it is spoken when it matters, when hope begins to fracture, when reinforcements don't come, when the line begins to bend. It is not for the enemy, it is for the brother beside you. The faith of the Crimson Fists is not a fire that consumes, it is a wall that holds, and like all good walls, its strength lies not in how it was built, but in the refusal to fall, no matter what slams against it. The Crimson Fists are not a chapter of loud legends. Their heroes do not ride in on thunderhawks framed in gold or bear swords named in prophecy. They are not chosen by fate. They are chosen by attrition. And it is in that distinction, between glory and grind, that their figures emerge, not as saints, but as shields that held when the others broke. Before he was the first chapter master of the Crimson Fists, Alexis Pollux was the praetor of the Imperial Fists, 405th Company, commander of the Phalanx's war fleet during the Horus Heresy. At the Battle of Phol, he outmaneuvered the Iron Warriors in a brutal void engagement that would shape the chapter's legacy before it even began. Pollux did not seek command. He accepted it as penance and design, to carry forward Dawn's will when the Legion could not. He chose the Codex Astartes not because he adored Guilliman's doctrine, but because he understood it would preserve what mattered. His blend of flexibility, stubborn precision, and refusal to waste lives set the spiritual tone of the chapter more than any liturgy ever could. To the Crimson Fists, Pollux is not a statue. He is a shadow they still walk beside. There is no Crimson Fists without Pedro Kantor, survivor of Rynn's world, rebuilder of the chapter. The man who took 93 surviving battle brothers and turned them into a functioning force of planetary defense, hunting orcs street by street while still wearing the ash of his brothers on his armor. He later crossed the Rubicon Primaris, becoming a hybrid of old memory and new design. But even with enhanced strength, it is his mind that defines him. Kantor is a leader of quiet authority, known for speaking last and acting first. He refuses to allow despair to fracture his command, and by sheer presence alone, holds a chapter together that should, by all logic, have perished long ago. He does not command loyalty, he embodies it. Commander of the Second Company, Hallgrim is one of the few firstborn to survive both the Rynn's world catastrophe and the subsequent rebuilding. Known for his silence, Hallgrim rarely speaks outside of tactical analysis, but when he does, it's to settle disputes without drawing his weapon. He was one of the first to volunteer for the Rubicon, and though the surgery nearly killed him, he emerged stronger, faster, and still completely loyal to Kantor's vision. Hallgrim is not interested in honors. He's interested in making sure there are enough brothers left to fight the next battle. Noted for his sermons on the Day of Foundation, Estevan is a chaplain who has deliberately chosen to remain firstborn, citing that a louder voice does not always carry further. He played a central role in easing tension between Primaris and firstborn warriors after the Indomitus reinforcements arrived. His rituals focus less on fire and more on connection. The reminder that to wear the Crimson Gauntlet is not to be perfect, but to carry the imperfection of those who died before you. Estevan is often the last man to speak to a dying brother. He records every word. No one has ever seen his full scroll. One of the few sanctioned psychers within the Crimson Fists, Elzevir is rarely seen outside of combat. His psychic gift burns fast, erratic, and tightly controlled, a necessity for a chapter that has always viewed the warp with suspicion. Though fiercely loyal, Elzevir walks a careful line. His combat precognition has saved entire squads, but his access to the chapter's relics remains restricted, and he accepts this without protest. His role is not glory. It is to be the blade that cuts before anyone else can see the danger. To newer brothers, he is myth. To veterans, he is the necessary risk they cannot afford to lose. One of the oldest surviving members of the chapter's forge, Varn communicates more with machines than men. He's kept relics operational that should have fallen silent millennia ago, and he is said to know the machine spirit of Arx Tyrannus better than any living soul. Varn led the effort to recover and re-sanctify damaged war gear after the Rynn's World incident. Many of the chapter's Primaris pattern weapons first passed through his hands and through his judgment. He doesn't fear the machine spirit. He just refuses to let it forget who used it first. The Crimson Fists do not elevate their heroes to the status of demigods. They do not rename companies after them. They do not carve their faces into stone. They remember them, in whispers, in battle doctrines, in the way a bolter is held when the line begins to shake. Because in this chapter, legacy isn't a song. It's a scar that teaches the next strike where to land. The Crimson Fists are not an aggressive chapter. They do not seek the thrill of the charge. They do not scream into the heart of battle for glory. They arrive, assess, and begin the calculated dismantling of their enemies. And yet, to fight beside them is to witness violence on a scale that feels cold, measured, inevitable. Because their doctrine is not built around flamboyant destruction. It is built around removal, of threat, of territory, of future resistance. They do not waste energy on fire that doesn't serve a purpose. Every bolter round, every orbital deployment, every meter of ground held or taken is designed to send one message. You will not break us. We are already broken, and we are still here. As Sons of Dawn, the Crimson Fists are master siege specialists, not in constructing fortresses, but in becoming them. Their understanding of choke points, overlapping kill zones, fallback vectors, and firing tier elevation is so advanced that many Astra Militarum tacticians train under adapted versions of Kantor's codified siege doctrines. This talent for defense does not make them passive, quite the opposite. A Crimson Fist defensive engagement is an invitation to bleed. They allow the enemy in just far enough, and then shatter momentum with brutal precision. Their defensive perimeters are not static walls. They are bladed coils, designed to collapse inward at the exact moment the enemy overextends. And when the Fists counterattack, it is not with rage, it is with certainty. After the loss of Arx Tyrannus, the chapter formalized a deployment schema now referred to as Rynn pattern doctrine. It emphasizes micro-deployment, where forces are dropped in clusters across wide terrain, avoiding centralization that would invite catastrophic loss from orbital strikes or psychic detonation. These distributed squads operate under strict Vox discipline and recon-fed coordination, leveraging auger triangulation and overlapping recon fields to funnel enemies toward kill havens. Zones pre-established as temporary strongholds with entrenched firepower, usually manned by intercessors and stern guard squads. If necessary, Rynn pattern can invert, splitting elite squads across multiple fronts to act as surgical disruption teams, bleeding the horde until reinforcements arrive or until no one is left to reinforce. It is not beautiful. It is brutal logic under pressure. Their rebuilding years forced them to perfect warfare in collapsed terrain, shattered cities, half-burning manufactorums, labyrinthine hab-block ruins. This bred a mastery of urban warfare rarely matched outside of deathcore kill zones. Veteran squads routinely operate with paired scout overwatch, creating ambush corridors in ruined streets where enemies are herded like cattle into crossed bolter fields. Power fists are favored in close quarters, especially among First Company veterans, who will often engage even large orc knobs in melee if it allows for momentum disruption. Their asymmetrical response strategies are infamous. Orc warbands have been known to lose entire columns to Crimson Fist's strike teams operating from sewer systems or maintenance shafts. Even in planetary campaigns where the chapter is outnumbered 50-1, they hold. Because they've fought worse. And they remember how. The Crimson Fists maintain a proud and active presence in the Deathwatch, where their expertise in Xenos warfare, especially against orcs, has become a tactical asset across the Segmentum Tempestus. Their veterans do not treat this service as exile. They treat it as refinement. Many return with new stratagems, rare equipment familiarity, and cross-chapter insights that are debriefed and codified into live doctrine. These adaptations are absorbed into Rynn pattern operations with remarkable speed, making the chapter modular, evolving, and impossible to predict twice. The Crimson Fists are not conquerors. They do not fight for territory, or even for victory. They fight to ensure something remains standing. They will retreat if it preserves a strategic asset. They will sacrifice veterans if it saves a scout. They will abandon the field, only to return later with better plans and nothing left to spare. Their tactics are painfully efficient. They are not looking to win. They are looking to end the enemy faster than they are depleted, and they usually do. To stand beside the Crimson Fists in battle is to feel the ground itself harden. To fight them is to feel your victories collapse, one layer at a time, until the only thing left between you and the void is a fist, and it is already red. The Crimson Fists do not worship their war gear, but they listen to it. Where many chapters speak of relics in reverent tones, treating them as totems of divinity, the Crimson Fists treat theirs as ghosts, echoes of battles long lost, of brothers long dead, of oaths long broken but never forgotten. And because of this, every weapon, every suit of armor, every augmetic in their arsenal is not simply equipment. It is memory, weaponized. The destruction of Arx Tyrannus was not just the loss of a fortress. It was the loss of 10,000 years of relics, archives, ancient cogitators, recovered artifacts from Phal, war gear gifted by the Imperial Fists themselves. The chapter lost entire vaults of relic armor, power fists, venerated banners, and, most critically, sections of their gene seed repository. Only a handful of relics survived, some unearthed years later from collapsed subvaults, others recovered by tech marines who refused to abandon their machines even as the mountain burned. This loss reshaped the chapter's relationship with its war gear. No longer could it afford to preserve every relic in stasis. Every functioning piece of ancient technology had to fight. Survival came before ceremony. The chapter fields a mixture of Mark 7 Aquila and Mark 10 Tacticus and Gravis armor. Firstborn Marines often continue to wear their own armor into their second or even third century of service, each plate personally maintained, many bearing manual etchings marking campaigns, kill counts, or moments of shame. Primaris armor, though superior in performance and survivability, is handled with cautious reverence. Each new suit is tested not just for function, but for spirit resonance, ensuring no corrupted or resentful machine spirit lingers in the subsystems. Tech Marines frequently cite echoes of unfamiliar data pulses and rogue backscrolls from Khal pattern war gear, prompting careful sanctification before battlefield use. Among the most sacred suits, the Hand of Tharsis, a gravitic-modified Gravis armor rumored to have survived the final siege of Velmyra. It is deployed only during Exterminatus tier scenarios. Oathplate Cantoris, Pedro Kantor's modified Primaris armor, incorporating ancient servo-core elements salvaged from his original Mark 7. It is unique, a physical union of Firstborn and Primaris lineage. The Power Fist, symbol of the chapter, is more than ceremonial. It is functionally revered. Not all warriors earn the right to wield one. Those who do, often after decades of frontline service, are inducted into inner rites known only to veterans of the Crusade First Company. Relic weapons are rare. Many were lost in the Rynn's world blast. Those that remain are fiercely protected and never granted without purpose. Among them, the Fist of Ralgar, an ancient master-crafted power fist once worn by Alexis Pollux' honor guard. Said to crack the carapace of a Carnifex in a single strike. The Red Requiter, a combiplasma once wielded by a sergeant who held the breach at Clovis Hive for 6 days alone. Its targeting optics are now permanently fused. The weapon only fires when aimed by instinct. Modern Primaris war gear is integrated cautiously. Plasma incinerators, bolt rifles, and auto-bolt carbines are deployed alongside older loadouts, often in mixed squads. The Crimson Fists have learned to blend generations. A Gravis-armoured aggressor may fire side by side with a tactical marine in ancient Mark VI Corvus armour, and no one questions it. Their dreadnoughts are not ceremonial relics. They are active battle assets, and each is treated as both warrior and sage. Most are firstborn, ancient beyond reckoning, and serve not just as heavy support, but as repositories of chapter memory. The transition to Redemptor pattern dreadnoughts has been hesitant. While the increased mobility and firepower are valued, many within the Reclusium worry that the spiritual resonance of these newer chassis feels too clean, too quiet. No battle-scarred machine spirit, no hum of ancient sorrow. Still, when used, they are used well. A Redemptor under Kantor's personal command shattered 3 Orc battle fortresses during the defense of Garrick's Hold. The Crimson Fists do not hoard relics, they deploy them. A power weapon not drawn is a brother not saved, but each relic must be earned, not by rank, but by loss, of squad, of city, of self. Recovered gear is ritually interrogated by tech marines and chaplains. They listen for glitch patterns, ritual error logs, non-random Auspex pulses, the subtle signs of a weapon that remembers its last bearer too well. If a relic rejects a warrior, it is returned to stasis. If it accepts, the warrior is marked, forever. To the Crimson Fists, technology is not divine, but it is sacred. Because in every dented pauldron, every misfiring bolt casing, every soot-stained vent coil, there is a brother who didn't return. And when they raise those weapons again, they don't do it for vengeance. They do it so the machine spirit doesn't forget what it means to fight beside them. The Crimson Fists do not mark time by victories. They mark it by what was nearly lost. Their most defining battles are not the ones they won cleanly. They are the ones they barely survived. The ones where doctrine cracked, where blood outpaced ammunition, where honor had to be proven again and again in the face of utter annihilation. Every key campaign in the chapter's history is not just a strategic memory, it is a scar, and they keep count. Before the Crimson Fists were born, Alexis Pollux stood as praetor of the Imperial Fists fleet, charged with guarding the Outer Imperium in Dawn's absence. At Fall, his warships encountered the Iron Warriors, a traitor force driven by bitterness and siegecraft unmatched. Pollux turned a desperate, disorganized defense into a counter-siege in the void, deploying formations under constant ambush, shielding vulnerable assets with crippled hulls, and personally directing shipboard defense actions that held the line for days without reinforcement. This wasn't just survival. It was precision under failure, the genetic blueprint of everything the Crimson Fists would later become. It is still studied. It is still quoted. The doctrine forged at Fall is embedded in their Rynn pattern tactics to this day. The war for Rynn's world, the loss that defined them. In 989 of M41, an Orc War led by Snagrod, arch-arsonist of Sharadun, surged toward Rynn's world. The Crimson Fists responded with standard deployment procedures, full mobilization, fortress lockdown, and orbital denial strikes. What followed was not Orc genius. It was pure chance, made fatal by desperation. An orbital missile misfired. It struck Arx Tyrannus directly. The fortress-monastery was annihilated. Over 900 battle brothers died in seconds. The chapter was functionally destroyed. And then the Orcs landed. Pedro Kantor, chapter master, survived. With fewer than 100 Marines, he initiated what would become one of the most studied defensive campaigns in Imperial history. A shattered, starving force using PDF survivors, ruined infrastructure, and sheer will to bleed Snagrod's forces until the War collapsed under its own weight. Kantor did not win, but he did not fall. And from that moment, the Crimson Fists were no longer just a successor chapter. They were the chapter that lived. The defense of Traedor Reach, the line held too long. In the late M41, a combined Orc and Chaos incursion breached the Loki sector's eastern edge. The Crimson Fists were deployed to Traedor Reach, a frontier cluster already under siege for weeks. Initial scans underestimated the scale of the Xenos horde by several orders of magnitude. Kantor ordered a full Codex deviation redeployment, splitting battle companies into 3-man Lancer cells, pairing assault marines with scout snipers and tech marine field engineers. These cells operated independently for 72 Terran days, calling orbital strikes, rigging manufactorums for collapse, and halting 5 planetary invasions simultaneously. The cost was enormous. 3 companies were left under strength for decades. But the Reach held, and the enemy didn't just lose. They lost their will to continue. Deathwatch integration, the Outer Wars. The Crimson Fists' long campaigns in Deathwatch service are rarely recorded in their own histories, but they are felt. Veterans return with knowledge of Tyrannid bioforms, Eldari maneuver doctrine, and Tau digital warfare protocols, all filtered into the chapter's battle readiness archives. The 3rd and 5th companies routinely deploy kill team adapted fire teams even outside of formal Deathwatch operations. These units specialize in strike to crush engagements. Precise, single objective missions designed to break enemy command or resource chains in under 12 hours. Their enemies rarely realize they've lost until they're already bleeding out. The reclamation of Sirax II, the Ghost Moon. Sirax II was declared lost to the warp after a 3-century silence. When a distress signal emerged in M42, the Crimson Fists were dispatched to investigate. What they found was a dead moon, filled with dormant demonic machines, relics of the Dark Mechanicum slowly reawakening. Kantor ordered a containment operation, refusing to call for exterminatus unless absolutely necessary. For 2 weeks, squads moved through the depths of Serax's forgotten manufactorums, fighting silence, madness, and memory. The final purge was led by veteran Captain Holt, who detonated a chain of abandoned Prometheum vaults to collapse an entire continent, and then walked out of the ashes carrying his squad's lone surviving neophyte. The moon was sterilized, and the Fists learned something new. That facing the warp doesn't mean losing to it. The day of renewal, the gift, and the oath. With the launch of the Indomitus Crusade, Robout Guilliman restored the Crimson Fist's gene seed vaults and deployed a full complement of Primaris reinforcements, many drawn from stock based on their own legacy. It should have been a moment of rebirth. Instead, the chapter treated it as a debt. The event is now marked as the Day of Renewal, a sacred time when all battle brothers re-oath themselves to the ones who didn't live long enough to be saved. It is not celebratory. It is solemn, unified, and unbreakable. And it is Kantor's lasting reminder. We were not saved. We were given a second chance. We will not waste it. The history of the Crimson Fists is not a scroll. It is a scar map, a living testament to failure overcome and survival earned. And it is still being written. The Crimson Fists today are not whole. They are not at full strength and may never be again. But they are functioning, active, and dangerous. They have not been rebuilt to some pristine vision of pre-Rynn's glory. They have been reforged into what survival demands, a hybrid of Firstborn and Primaris, of old scars and new blood, of doctrine rooted in pain and tactics born from adaptation. They do not measure success in numbers. They measure it in continuity, and by that measure, they are alive. As of early M42, the Crimson Fists field an estimated 500 battle brothers in active rotation, 150 neophytes in various stages of scout training, 40 veterans serving across Deathwatch detachments, plus logistical and command cadre, including chaplains, apothecaries, tech marines, and librarians. This represents a partial rebuild following the Primaris reinforcements and gene seed replenishment delivered during the Indomitus Crusade. However, the chapter does not operate at full Codex strength. Certain companies remain under strength, and several key relics, war machines, and command structures lost at Arx Tyrannus have not been replaced. But their operational readiness remains high, thanks to extreme tactical flexibility and rigorous internal efficiency protocols. They are a half-manned blade, but one that still cuts. The chapter now exists in a delicate fusion of generations. Firstborn veterans retain command of many squads, particularly in the 1st and 4th companies. Primaris Marines, including intercessors, aggressors, and blade guard, are fully integrated into field operations. Rubicon-crossed firstborn such as Pedro Kantor and Captain Halgrim now bridge the gap between traditions, reinforcing unity through shared pain and purpose. This coexistence is not without tension, but the chapter's culture of stoic endurance has prevented the fractures that might have crippled a less introspective force. Their combined presence has given rise to a multi-vector warfare model, one in which firstborn units excel in infiltration, urban survival, and asymmetric defense, while Primaris forces deliver shock-and-hold tactics with overwhelming firepower. Arx Tyrannus, the broken fortress rebuilt. The ruins of the original Arx Tyrannus have been partially excavated and transformed into the new fortress-monastery. It is not grand, it is not whole, it is functional. The rebuilt structure uses salvaged ferrocrete and reinforced ceramite to form a low-profile bastion, focused more on underground resilience than towering spires. Below ground, the gene vaults, war gear sanctums, and liturgical halls have been restored, but many chambers remain sealed, haunted by dead machine spirits and debris too sacred to discard. There are no statues, no murals, no attempt to erase what happened. The Crimson Fists live in their wound, and they use it to remind themselves what failure almost cost them. Within the greater Adeptus Astartes, the Crimson Fists hold no political power in the High Lord's arena. They are not a flagship chapter. They are not courted by the ecclesiarchy. They are not asked to attend parades. But they are respected. Other chapters, particularly those of Dawn's bloodline, recognize the Crimson Fists as true inheritors of stoic duty. Their contributions to the Feast of Blades continue unbroken. Their Death Watch service is unmatched in Xenos-targeted kill teams. Their battle doctrines are often requested by Astra Militarum commanders operating in siege or encirclement theatres. Strategically, the chapter is a keystone presence in the Loki sector, the outer bulwark of Imperial territory plagued by Orc resurgence, minor Tyrannid splinters, and warp-tainted pirate dynasties. They are the edge that never gives in. As of the latest Imperial records, the Crimson Fists are engaged in the following active theatres: the Purging of Barad 6, a joint operation with Death Watch elements to clear ancient Eldari ruins being co-opted by Chaos cultists. Stealth, containment, and artifact denial protocols in effect. The Orc encroachment of Garrick's Reach, ongoing suppression of Snagrod's successor clans attempting to rebuild infrastructure. Kantor has personally taken field command. Gene Seal Recon of Calvaris, a secretive mission under Librarian Elzevir to retrieve lost relic gene sequences suspected to have survived the Rynn's world blast in orbital fragments. Confirmed psychic interference noted. These engagements are surgical, limited, and deliberate, each chosen not for spectacle, but for strategic necessity and symbolic reclamation. The Crimson Fists are not rising. They are holding, and in a galaxy where every star seems to be dying, every wall collapsing, every oath being twisted by time. That might be the most heroic thing anyone can do. To be a Crimson Fist is to carry silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence that comes after the screaming has stopped, after the fortress has fallen, after the last brother's Vox has gone dead. And all that's left is the memory and the expectation that you keep going. The Crimson Fists are not defined by triumph. They are defined by persistence under collapse, by a culture forged in trauma, tempered in reflection, and bound by an iron refusal to succumb to despair. This is not romantic, it is not noble, it is survival made sacred. The psychological cost of the Rynn's world catastrophe echoes through the chapter's structure, traditions, and behaviour. Every battle brother trained in its aftermath has known that he walks the halls once filled with ghosts, that every suit of armour once had another name, another voice, another death. To be a Crimson Fist is to live in the absence of those who should have stood beside you. This creates an atmosphere not of grief, but of grave responsibility. Brothers do not weep, they remember. They etch the names of the lost into their armour's inner plating. They carry old commendations in hollow purity seals. They sit for hours in silence on Arx Tyrannus' shattered walls, reciting deployment orders from campaigns that no longer exist. And then they return to war. Every Crimson Fist carries a personal account, a mental ledger of debts that can never be repaid. Not debts of shame, but debts of survival. They live because others fell. They serve because others no longer can. This concept is formalized in the Oath of Remembrance, a self-imposed rite spoken privately before each deployment. For the hands that dropped their blade, I raise mine. For the shield that shattered, I become the wall. For the eyes that closed, I will see this through. No fanfare, no witnesses. Just one man, one gauntlet, and the knowledge that he is not allowed to stop. The Crimson Fists do not suppress emotion. They discipline it. Chaplains are trained to detect not spiritual heresy, but emotional decay, lethargy, disassociation, survivor's guilt, fatalism. These are not signs of weakness. They are alerts that a brother may soon be incapable of fulfilling his duty. Meditation chambers beneath Arx Tyrannus are not quiet sanctuaries. They are filled with recorded battlefield sounds, the actual last moments of former brothers, used not to traumatize, but to anchor. Neophytes are exposed to these memories early to teach them that grief is not the enemy. Forgetfulness is. In an Imperium riddled with contradiction, where orders from the High Lords contradict the needs of the battlefield, and where once loyal allies burn entire cities to preserve purity, the Crimson Fists have remained morally precise. They do not allow the warp taint of zealotry to cloud the clarity of necessary action. They will fire on civilians if the Xenos threat demands it. They will spare civilians if victory can be achieved without their deaths. They will not indulge in the righteous bloodletting so many of their cousins mistake for duty. Their only measure is, did we protect what could be saved? And they apply it without compromise. But it is not perfect. Even the strongest wall develops cracks. There are brothers who have chosen to die rather than return. There are those who no longer speak. There are suits of armor recovered from battlefields where no enemy reached, where the warrior inside simply lay down and stopped moving. These moments are not denied. They are recorded, studied, spoken of during the day of foundation as lessons, not of failure, but of strain exceeded. The chapter does not excommunicate those who falter. It remembers them, so that the next brother may bear the weight longer. To be a Crimson Fist is not to be fearless. It is to carry fear like a blade, to use pain as a compass, to feel the collapse of all things around you and remain upright. Because in the end, their legacy is not just a matter of endurance. It is the unspoken oath etched into the soul of every brother. If we fall, it will be over our own bones, and only after we've made the galaxy bleed for every step. In a galaxy swarming with 1,000 chapters, each with their own colors, creeds, and banners, the Crimson Fists remain unmistakable, not because they are ornate or flamboyant, but because they are uncompromising in simplicity. Their aesthetic identity is not a performance. It is a signal, a message that echoes through every battlefield, whispered beneath the scream of bolters. We are still here. The Crimson Fists wear a deep midnight blue power armor, overlaid with contrasting crimson gauntlets, a left-hand mark that every battle brother earns after passing the trial of the Barb Dragon and completing the steeping. Veterans who ascend to the First Crusade Company are permitted to mark both fists in crimson, an honor not granted lightly. The color is not symbolic of wrath or aggression, but of sacrifice. The left hand is for the blood you must shed. The right is for the blood you already did. The chapter's armor is often worn bare, without excessive ornamentation. Some Marines carry etched kill tallies, unit sigils, or private votive marks. Others wear battered, unreforged plate, choosing to preserve the dents and scrapes of previous engagements rather than risk erasing the memory of fallen comrades. Their chapter badge, a red clenched fist, is worn on the left shoulder pad, stylized but not exaggerated. It is the same symbol worn by Alexis Pollux and his command retinue in the aftermath of the heresy. And it has not changed. There are no purity seals flapping for show, no unnecessary script. The few relics carried in battle are personal, often hidden beneath the armor, for the bearer, not the viewer. Company markings are minimalist, following Codex Astartes standard, Roman numerals for company, tactical, assault, or devastator symbols for squad role. Campaign honors, when present, are almost always limited to single icon strokes, a lightning bolt for void-born engagements, a broken skull for Orc war victories, a burning crescent for survival under Exterminator's threat. Only chaplain armor deviates, with deep obsidian overlays, crimson bone etchings, and stylized laurel wrappings around skull-faced helms. Even then, the effect is one of restraint, not spectacle. A crimson fist formation appears like a tidal fault line, still, rigid, and quietly lethal. They do not roar before battle, they do not chant. They check lines, reload bolters, calibrate aurspecs, and watch. And then, when the order comes, they do not stop moving. Their formations are tight, overlapping, geometrically precise. Sternguard veterans often anchor the center. Intercessors fan out in layered arcs. Scouts move as shadow lines, establishing fallback paths and flanking angles before the enemy realizes they're already being boxed in. There is no drama in their advance, only purpose. And when a fist falls, another steps forward without needing to be told. To their enemies, the Crimson Fists feel heavier than they should. Not just in armor, in presence. Even greenskins, famously resistant to fear, have been observed retreating not from losses, but from the realization that the fists are not responding to casualties. No taunting, no retaliation. Just that same slow, creeping forward line. To Imperial allies, their presence is often unnerving. Guardsmen report feeling as though they are fighting beside statues, until the moment the statues open fire with mechanized precision and calculated fury. The Crimson Fists do not project dominance, they project endurance, and that's worse, because the enemy begins to understand they aren't facing warriors hoping to win. They're facing warriors who have already lost everything, and kept fighting anyway. Everything about the chapter's visual and cultural identity loops back to this central idea. They did not die. Not at Fall, not at Rynn's world, not in the warp storms or the Orc crusades or the bureaucratic neglect of Terror. They are not supposed to be here. But they are, and when you see that midnight blue in the distance, those fists, stained red like memory that refuses to fade, you don't feel watched. You feel judged. There are chapters whose names thunder across the galaxy, whose banners hang in the Imperial Palace, whose deeds are sung by the Ministorum, whose triumphs are carved into the memory of the Imperium like cathedral pillars. And then there are the Crimson Fists. Their name is not shouted. It is spoken in silence like a warning or a prayer. Because their legacy is not built on spectacle. It is built on survival without applause. It is built on doing what must be done, again and again, long after others have burned out. And in that legacy, they have become indispensable. Within the halls of the Scholar Progenium, Crimson Fist's battle doctrines are studied as case studies in last stand warfare. Rynn pattern defensive logic is a staple in Imperial Guard siege officer training, especially in sectors bordering Orc or Tyrannid activity. While chapters like the Ultramarines codify how to win, the Crimson Fists have codified how to endure. Urban encirclement protocols based on post-Rynn's world guerrilla actions. Microcell disruption tactics, formed from their response to chaos incursions in the Syrax Nebula. Void reclamation playbooks, adapted from Fahl and subsequent Deathwatch engagements. In many war zones, when things are already too far gone, when cities are burning, regiments are collapsing, and hope is a heresy, it's not the wolves or the angels that the local commanders ask for. It's the fists, because they will not save the city, but they will make the enemy pay for every step it takes to kill them. To the greater Imperium, administratum clerks, rogue traders, planetary governors, the Crimson Fists are not celebrities. They are constants. Their presence is not inspiring. It is sobering. They appear when the war is not going to be clean, when there will be no songs, no monuments, no Imperial truth hymns written for the dead. Only the cold tick of a hab world that still functions when the smoke clears. For this reason, they are often underreported in Imperial propaganda. But within internal records, they are flagged again and again as tactical fail-safe implementers. Xenos suppression assets, high retention probability. Rynn-type operators. This clinical terminology belies the truth, that when they arrive, even other Astartes know things are worse than they seem. Among their brother chapters, particularly the Scions of Rogel Dawn, the Crimson Fists are regarded with a respect that borders on quiet awe. They lack the pageantry of the Black Templars. They lack the strategic theatre of the Imperial Fists. But what they do have is something rarer, a decades-long refusal to collapse without the support, acclaim, or reinforcements granted to larger, more visible forces. This has made them a grounding force at events like the Feast of Blades, where their performance is often stoic, surgical, and unrelenting. They win not by flourish, but by reducing every duel to attrition, exactly as they do in war. You do not cheer when a Crimson Fist wins. You just realize the fight is over, and that he never gave you a chance to recover. In the border worlds of the Loki sector, the Crimson Fists have become a mythic presence. Stories abound of lone fists holding bridges until artillery shells drown the horizon, of scout squads sabotaging orc war engines with detonation charges made from their own broken Vox units. To the common Imperial citizen, they are neither saviors nor destroyers. They are endings. When a Crimson Fist arrives, the question is not whether you'll win, it's whether anything will be left standing when the fighting stops. Some planetary cults whisper that the red gauntlet symbolizes blood owed to the Emperor. Others believe that the fists do not die, but simply vanish into the void, to return when next they are needed. The chapter neither encourages nor condemns these myths. They simply keep moving. Even now their story isn't finished. The Indomitus Crusade has given them numbers, the Primaris infusion has restored their war gear. Arx Tyrannus breathes again, the line holds. But the Crimson Fists do not see themselves as restored. They see themselves as responsible, for the future, for the past, and for every battle yet to come. Their legacy is not about survival. It is about proving, every day, that survival wasn't a mistake. There are no songs for the Crimson Fists, no golden statues in the High Lord's chambers. No luminous frescoes painted across the void-haunted walls of terror. They do not exist to inspire. They exist to endure. And if you listen closely, beneath the noise of bolter fire and orbital vox hail, you'll hear what makes them different. Not their doctrine, not their history, but the silence they carry, the memory of survival carved into everything they touch. They are not heroes. They are what remains when heroes fall. You can trace their bloodline back to Dawn. You can cite their victories at Fall, Rynn's World, Traedor Reach. You can study their tactics, measure their casualties, admire their stubbornness in the face of overwhelming odds. But you will never understand them unless you understand this. The Crimson Fists are not trying to win. They're trying to make sure that losing doesn't mean ending. That even if the fortress burns, even if the company falls, even if the last brother's vox is silent and the line has cracked, the name survives, and that name carries with it not glory, but memory. Not faith in triumph, but a cold, patient refusal to disappear. In a galaxy of shining angels and burning prophets, the Crimson Fists are the echo at the edge of every war hymn. The ones you didn't notice at first, but now can't forget. They will be there when the banners fall. They will be there when the last vox goes quiet. They will be there when even victory feels like surrender. And they will not ask for thanks. They will simply reload and move forward, the end, or rather, what remains.